Hello and peace, everyone, to this month's World Book Day Book Club. And I'm delighted to be your host, Kenny Baraka. This month, we have with us Thomas Taylor, the author of the sea-soaked mythological mystery, Malamander, July's title for World Book Day Book Club. How are you doing today, Thomas?
I'm fine, Kenny. Hi, thanks for inviting me on. It's great to be here.
Lovely to have you. If you could, tell us a little bit about, with words painting 1,000 pictures, can you paint us a portrait of the person who's illustrated the very first edition of a quite famous book, and the journey from that to being the author of such an exquisitely written novel?
Well, thank you. So I think what you're alluding to is my very first job out of art school, because even though I'm an author now, I actually started out as an illustrator primarily. And the very first job I got out of art school was to illustrate a book that no one had heard of by an author that no one had heard of, and illustrated by me who no one had heard of. And that book was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which I have here. Now, you might not see this cover so much now because the covers change a lot, but this is the my very first job. So I had to watch as the very first thing I painted professionally became super famous and was absolutely everywhere. And children were waving the book around. It was quite a strange experience, quite an odd start to my career, because normally the first thing you do when you're an illustrator, you quite want that to be forgotten, I think. But in my case, here it is. And so I became an illustrator, and I had quite a lot of work doing picture books as well for a long time. But I got a bit impatient in the end because I thought, it's great doing this, but I'm a bit tired of waiting for authors to write stories for me to illustrate. I want to write stories of my own. And so eventually I plucked up the courage to start writing. I wasn't really sure if I could. It was quite a sort of new thing for me. But in the end, I managed to write my book, Malamander. And yeah, it's now becoming a series, and it's been quite successful. So it's quite a nice leap to make to find out that side, the writing side as well as the illustrating side. So that's me.
If you were to have a particular snack or snacks while reading Malamander, what would it be?
Well, it would have to be fish and chips. And I know that's probably quite a big snack, but fish and chips, I hope you can smell the smell of fish and chips as you read the book. And my characters, Herbie and Violet, whenever they need to think about anything or have a bit of time out from the adventure, they go to Seagull's Diner on the pier in Erie-on-Sea, best fish and chips for miles around, and they eat the fish and chips and they discuss the adventure. So fish and chips, but also I'm a foodie as well, so that's good. So there are masses of cakes. There's hot chocolate. There's lemonade. It's a book made to eat things with. And in fact, even the main characters, Herbert Lemon and Violet Palmer. Well, I think you can guess who or what they're named after: Sherbet Lemons and Palmer Violets. So there's a lot of snacks with my books.
Building off of that, so we have foods. We have our fish and chips. We have lemon and Parma. Could you possibly tell us a little bit more about the book for readers who might be interested but want to know just a little bit more before they commit to such a marvelous adventure?
Well, I live by the sea now. I live right by the sea near Hastings in England on the south coast. And since I came to live here, because I used to know seaside towns as a place you went in the day, and then in the evening you went home again. And you only really went there in the summer anyway, even if the weather wasn't very nice. So I didn't know what it was like to be in a seaside town all year round. So to still be here when it's cold and wet, or every day when the wind is roaring across the beach, or when a sea mist creeps in and fills the streets of the town and you can't see your hand in front of you. I didn't know what it was like when the hotels are almost empty, but there's still someone staying there, and you wonder, why is there someone staying there? And the only people you see on the beach have got a very good reason to be there, or maybe a very bad reason to be there. So it's a very mysterious place. These seaside towns tend to close up a bit in the winter, and I really enjoy that. I really enjoy wondering who would come and what could happen, and all those sort of stories and legends that people laugh about in the summer suddenly seem a lot less funny and a lot less laughable in the winter, and you wonder, oh, is there some truth in that story? So that's really where I'm coming from with the books, and so I've really tried to roll with that and bring in every sort of bit of inspiration I could to make my town, Erie-on-Sea, feel like you really are going into this strange little seaside town.
Ooh, beautiful segue, Thomas. For a lot of our young writers, beginners, they find finding inspiration sometimes the most difficult part of the process. For you, what was the inspiration behind Malamander?
Kind of what I just said, but
Yep.
on top of that, also I have a dog, and my dog needs to be walked twice a day, and it doesn't matter what the weather is, he has to be walked. So we walk on the beach twice a day, and you can see like a kind of whole world appear that isn't there normally. So when the tide's in, the sea's right up, and then when the tide goes out, there's maybe a kilometre of sand and rocks and things there. So beachcombing was a thing I discovered when I moved here, and the things I find on the beach are amazing, and I love to find out what they are, fossils and shells and sea glass. But often I'm left wondering, I know what these things are in real life. This is a shell, for example, a shell. Yep. This one is very pearlescent and very beautiful, as you can see. It's from a saddle oyster, and I know what that is. But I like to think, well, what could this be in a legend? What could this be in a story? What could this inspire? And I think that that's fun as a shell, but a bit more magical if you think that it's actually the scale of a sea monster. And so it's finding things and allowing my mind to just be open to everything, and create and concoct and allow the story to grow. And so quite soon, I found out as I was walking on the beach that I had these characters sort of almost walking with me, and I was wondering what would Herbie think about this shell and the monster it might come from, and what would Violet think, and so the story just grew and grew and grew, and then before I knew it, I was making a seaside town in my head. And there comes a point where you have to start writing those things down, otherwise it's too much in your head and it starts to get a bit ridiculous.
Yeah. Building on that, legends and folklore being a huge part of this novel, can you talk to us a little bit about the myths that are involved in this story that help to build this world, and how you work with them in order to create your own personal Malamander monster?
Yes, well, in fact, it's partly myths that I know about and have seen and heard, but also partly it's like with the shell, it's real things from history, like dinosaurs, for example. So I'm inspired by a mixture of the mythic things and also the real things. But where I come from originally in East Anglia, for example, all along the coast there are quite a lot of legends of mermaids and sort of scaly men that come out of the sea, and all sorts of really strange stories that go back to the Middle Ages. But also, where I live now, for example, I've shown you the shell. Well, you can find something quite unusual where I live, and that's dinosaur bones on the beach. They actually wash out of a layer of clay at low tide. That clay has become rock now, but sometimes in that clay you can see dinosaur footprints. And when you see them, it's amazing. They're quite big, like a giant chicken has walked there. But if you think, because it's all wet, this clay looks like it's still fresh clay. It doesn't look like rock. And there's this giant footprint in it. And it's so sort of mysterious. Almost makes me want to sort of look over my shoulder and just check to see if there's something there, because it looks like it's just been made. So really, it was a combination of the real things I found and how I imagined them, but also some of these tales and stories in folklore that I grew up with in East Anglia, about sort of like fishmen and things mixed together is how I created the Malamander. And then to make the name, if you're interested, so I really wanted to make the creature sound like it was real, sound like it was like a real legend. So I took a real world word, and then I just changed one letter, and I realized if I changed the S in salamander to M, then I got Malamander, and mal, as you know, in French and in Spanish, that means evil or bad, and we have that in English a bit with, for example, Malfoy in the Harry Potter stories. So Malamander just sounded like a great monster name.
Awesome, yeah, awesome. Speaking of names, Herbie Lemon, Violet Palmer, our two main protagonists.
Yeah.
Introduce us to these two, please. Herbie Lemon.
So Herbie, Herbert Lemon, or Herbie to his friends, he's this 12-ish-year-old. He's not too sure how old he is. He washed up on the beach years before in Erie-on-Sea and has kind of been adopted by the town. And he works at the hotel. He has a job. He is the lost and founder of the Grand Nautilus Hotel. And the Grand Nautilus Hotel is this big sort of amazing hotel on the seafront. And Herbie, he works in the basement looking after lost property. But it's a little bit more than that. His job is to look after the lost property, but maybe also try and find the rightful owners and get it back to them as well. But he's a little bit timid. He's a little bit, he loves his job, but he's a little bit he's quite into the rules and how it should be done, but he's also a bit mischievous. He's a complicated little character, and he's a lot like me, I have to say. He lacks maybe a bit of sort of courage to sort of go out, and so that's Herbie. Herbie's a bit like me. Whereas Violet, on the other hand, Violet is, well, she's a lot more like I would like to be. So she's a lot more kind of go-getting, and she's much more courageous, but she's also quite reckless. And she comes into Herbie's life because she basically hands herself into his lost and foundry, his lost property department, and says, I was lost as a baby by my parents, and I want to be found. So, over to you. You will have to find my parents for me. And Herbie's got this sudden sort of job to look after this real person who is a piece of lost property. Not really lost property, but you know what I mean. And so it's the combination of the two. It's Herbie's slightly sort of timid and slightly officious kind of way of being, and Violet's kind of reckless, let's go and get it kind of thing, that they mix together, and they kind of make a perfect team in a way. Because on his own, Herbie probably wouldn't have very many adventures, and Violet on her own probably get into so much trouble she wouldn't get very far. You put them together, and it works, I hope.
Oh man, the setting of Malamander is so unique, yet at the same time familiar. It's quite difficult to do. How did you accomplish that?
It's partly just because of where I live and observing, and not just the town I live in. I mean, it's deliberately meant to be a mix of seaside towns I've known from all over the country and outside the country. So I have tried to draw on the real world a little bit to make it feel real. But also I see everything, I've got a visual imagination, so I tend to see everything first in my mind's eye, and so I like to try and describe what I'm seeing in my head as vividly as I can in words, so that the reader can also see it. That's the plan anyway. It's hard to do, but that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah. So it's a bit like sharing a film that I have in my head, and that's how I try to write. I try to write in a slightly sort of filmic way as much as possible.
Here at World Book Day Book Club, we have a lot of young writers watching, trying to, understand more about the process, learn more about the process. What advice might you give to a young person, a young author who's trying to write a fantasy?
So I think the first thing I would say is get started. That's a really important thing. Think about it. It's very important to think about it. You must get started. But I was also thinking how, if you want to create a world that feels real in your story, then you should be observant of the world around you. So go out and see the world you're in, and record in your memory all the people you meet, and pick up, it'll be like a magpie, pick up all the interesting things that you like, and wrap it all together and be inspired by the real world. Because then you can start to confabulate and mix up and create your fantasy world in your head, but also spend some time really imagining it before you write it down. Really see it in your mind's eye and try to sort of paint a picture in your head so that you really know it before you start writing. But I always think with advice, you must get started and you really must finish. Because that's often the hardest thing to do with writing. And if you can do those things at either end and do something really amazing with your imagination in the middle, then you're probably on a long way onto writing a good story.
That's really interesting. The way I kind of gauge my interest in whether I want to read a book is by reading the first opening lines and the very last. That's starting it. Yeah. And
head explode.
Whoa, okay. Here we go. What's going to happen in the middle, exactly as you said.
Yeah. The middle is a tricky part.
Yeah, that's the hard part. Most writers begin as readers. What would be, and I know this is a difficult question to pin it down to just one, what would be your favorite book and why?
It's a really difficult question, and I get asked a lot, and I really wish I had this really sort of set answer. But usually what happens when I'm asked this question is I give a different book. But probably I would have to, if I was being really honest about the book that turned me into a reader, that I read lots of times and would read again now if I felt like it, would be The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Because I remember reading that book when I was maybe 10 or 11. And it was the first time I read a longer novel, the first time I read a more substantial book. and got really lost in it and just loved it. And I kept turning the pages and turning the pages and turning the pages. Then, of course, you get to the end of that book, and you've got the last page. And it's the first time I felt really kind of bereft that the story had ended. But also, I remember how I turned the book over and I thought I could just start again and go back into this world. And it was the first time that had happened to me. And so The Hobbit has a special place in my reading life. So I think I'll stick with that. But often it is a hard question to answer.
As a mystery, obviously questions are a big part of it. Questions that are posed, alluded to, and obviously unraveling that mystery, the answers. With regards to Malamander, about the book, what question might you ask? What question might you think is interesting for readers to be considering as they're reading Malamander?
Oh gosh, that's tricky. I mean, I'm struggling with a bit of a question myself, and maybe I would put that over to readers, people who are reading my Malamander series, which is going to be 5 books in the end. Okay. As I'm actually working on book number 4 at the moment, so the next big project will be book number 5, and I'm going to wrap up a lot of the mystery and bring things together. But I would wonder whether readers of my books, whether they want every single mystery to be kind of explained and wrapped up, or whether they quite like it if some aspects of Irion Sea remain mysterious and remain beyond the stories to be discovered for themselves in their own imaginations, perhaps. So I do wonder what readers want. Do they want everything tied with a bow? Or do they like it when it's just a little bit fuzzy around the edges and you never quite know all the answers? So that would be interesting to know.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's World Book Day Book Club. We hope you've had a terribly terrific time thinking, talking, and hearing about books. Please let us know your thoughts and how much you love the Malamander. Happy monster chasing! Rah!
Thank you, Kenny, and thank you to the World Book Day Book Club. Thanks, it's been great to be invited on, and happy reading with all your book adventures.